Hey all, and welcome to my final 2024 Dynasty rookie rankings. Now, I consider myself more of an NFL draft person before Dynasty or Fantasy, but Dynasty and the NFL draft often go hand in hand, so that's why I still do Dynasty rookie rankings. For anyone that follows me for my Dynasty content, I put up my original 2024 Dynasty rookie rankings back on the Monday after the NFL draft, and for the most part, they're relatively similar, but definitely a few moves and changes that I've had since then, just with some of the moves and changes that the NFL teams have had and how training camp has been shaping out. Also, for full disclosure, I recorded these before any of the preseason games, just with how my schedule kind of worked out. So there's probably going to be at least one ranking or anything that will look really silly. That's just the way it goes, especially just right now. I'm recording this at a time when all the Brandon Ayuk rumors are going around, so we'll see how ridiculous that makes some of these rankings look. But I'm also going to be doing a speed run of some of these names and ranks since I have detailed evals and rankings that I've done in the past, which I'll have links down below if you want to check them out, but I just don't want to regurgitate information that a lot of you may have already read. So if you want to check out my full thoughts on the players or my full explanation on why they're ranked and they're ranked as they are now, you can check that out in the description below. All right, so let's get down to the rankings now. Starting out with the big three receivers, we have Marvin Harrison Jr. at number 1, Malik Nabers at number 2, and Rome Odunze at number 3. Like I just mentioned, all these players are still in the same spots I had them last for, and again, if you want to check out more details out, you can check them out in the descriptions below. But with Marvin Harrison Jr., great opportunity, great offense, really good quarterback, clear alpha receiver on his team. Malik Nabers, similar situation, quarterback's a little bit more iffy, and the offensive line could be a bit of a detriment still for the team. And Odunze just has a lot of competition, but really exciting player and tied with what I think is a really great quarterback. As for number 4 through 11, it's still all the same. I still have Xavier Worthy as my number 4 overall rookie, just really in a great situation, tied with the greatest quarterback in the league right now. He has a real opportunity to become the top receiver and really the top pass catcher, with Kelsey only getting older and older, and a lot of opportunity for him this coming season. Brian Thomas Jr., similar situation, just not as great of a quarterback situation, but Trevor Lawrence can still feed him well, and a ton of vacated opportunities for him in Jacksonville. Ladd McConkey, similar situation, being tied with Justin Herbert, and there's a ton of vacated targets with Keenan Allen and Mike Williams leaving the team, as well as many other players. Biggest thing that I mentioned with my original rankings is I think that high number of vacated targets isn't fully accurate or really predictable, just since there's going to be a decrease in passing volume overall with the switch to Jim Harbaugh and with Greg Roman's offense, but still really great opportunity for Ladd McConkey. I also still have Jonathan Brooks at number 7 overall for my rookie rankings. This actually, when I first put this out, this was much higher than a lot of people had originally, and now I feel like the scales kind of flipped the other way, where I'm not much lower, but I'm a little bit lower since I've seen him more around number 5, number 6 area. I think that's fair. I just think that there's a lot of risk with taking a running back that early, especially one coming off an ACL. And I think there's a lot of belief that Jonathan Brooks is immediately going to come into this year and be the lead back. Now, I was a big fan of him. He was my number 1 running back, and just based on my grading, it seemed like I was higher on him than a lot of evaluators. But I just don't think that's going to happen this year. I think in 2025 we'll definitely see that, but I think we should just kind of temper expectations a little bit for him for this coming year, but still really great outlook, and especially if that offense does really rebound with Dave Canales with the team, he could really be set to fly. I also still have Keon Coleman at number 8 for my rankings. Probably sounds like a broken record, but very similar situation as the earlier receivers, where he's in a really great situation, tied with a great quarterback and a ton of vacated opportunities. The team obviously added Curtis Samuel, who I think will be the team's top wideout this year, but there's nothing stopping from Coleman for pushing for 100 targets this season and really pushing to be the top receiver long-term, Josh Allen. The one ranking that I think a lot of people probably would have expected me to change that I'm still keeping at is going to be Brock Bowers, still being my number 9 overall rookie. Now, this is much lower than where a lot of people have him, and I totally understand why a lot of people have him higher. He's a fantastic prospect, loved him coming out of the draft. I've actually been a huge fan of his since he first played Georgia for his freshman year. For me, it just more comes down to 1, just what a tight end can do for your team, and then 2, just what his offense looks like right now. So with tight ends, if you happen to hit for them, that's great. That's fantastic. But a lot of times people overpay for tight ends, and then you kind of just get the same product as what someone got for a much better discount. Now, Brock Bowers is a great player, a great talent, so that's not saying that he's going to underperform. But when you look at his offense, you already have Devontae Adams there. You already have Jacoby Myers there. And you don't really have a whole lot at the quarterback position. So I just really have a hard time trusting that he's going to get the volume to justify him being taken that high. And everyone will say, okay, but once they figure out the quarterback position, once they get a quarterback, no problem. It's going to be nothing but smooth sailings for Bowers. But we see how many teams that struggle to find a quarterback for so many years. And if you watch my quarterback rankings video, I'm not super high on the next class of quarterbacks for the 2025 draft. So I'm not confident they're going to get one next year. Obviously, free agency, trades can change that. But I think we might be in for a Kyle Pitts 2023 season for Brock Bowers. And that could really make people sour on him, and it could really cause his value to drop. So I think it's just better to take him a little bit later, hope that you can get him while his value's at his peak. And if you don't get him, you can trade for him when his value starts to drop if he does start to underperform, kind of like I expect for his first season. As for my number 10 and 11, still the same with Caleb Williams at 10 and Jayden Daniels at 11. Both is just at that point where I'm starting to consider the quarterbacks. Caleb Williams was my number 1 quarterback in the class, so that's why he belongs at number 10 overall. Even as a Packers fan, I can say that I think he's in a really great situation with a really great supporting cast. And I think finally the Chicago Bears might be trending in the right direction. And with Jayden Daniels, the rushing upside is great, so that automatically gives him great value. I'm a fan of his supporting cast as well. It's not as great as what Caleb Williams has to work with, but I'm a fan of Terry McLaurin and Jahan Dotson. My biggest thing is I'm just worried about the Washington Commanders' offensive line, their play calling to a degree, as well as also just Jayden Daniels' processing. I'm just hoping that it's not as big of a concern as a lot of people had for him coming out of college. So we'll just kind of have to see what it looks like. But I think both Caleb Williams and Jayden Daniels give you some immediate QB1 possibilities if you are able to get them. My 12 through 15, to some surprise, is all still the same as well. I still have Trey Benson as my number 12 overall rookie, Jalen Polk as 13, Troy Franklin 14, and Drake May at 15. Troy Franklin is probably the most surprising one that I still have at 14, but he's kind of my plant the flag type of player for me. He's just someone that I really loved in the pre-draft process, and I was surprised that he fell as far as he did. I didn't really see anything concrete for the reason why he fell, and I definitely expect him to fall a little bit just with how his frame is, and especially with him not performing as great at the combine. But still, for the fall all the way to the 4th round was pretty surprising to me. But I think when you look at his situation, it's really ideal for someone that fell as far as he did. He gets to be reunited with his college quarterback, who he's shown great chemistry with the past 2 seasons in college. The receivers ahead of him aren't overly impressive. You have Cortland Sutton as the top receiver ahead of him. And then you have Marvin Mims, who was a disappointing rookie, and Josh Reynolds, who's solid but not great. And I know Mims and Reynolds have been having pretty solid camps and getting a lot of run with the first-team offenses, so definitely make me nervous a bit with my rank. But if I'm going to be scared off by Marvin Mims and Josh Reynolds, then I might as well not be a believer in his talent. So for Troy Franklin, I'm just willing to plant my flag on him and willing to take that chance, because with a lot of the receivers we're going to be talking about after him and players in general, there's just not that many players that have the upside he does if he does ascend the depth chart and become the top receiver for the team. And for Drake May, I think this is kind of where people are going to rank quarterbacks differently. I'm a little bit lower on quarterbacks for my ranking, so that's why May is all the way down at 15, but really talented player. I think he's definitely going to be in for a bit of a developmental year this year, and I see a lot of people that don't expect Jacoby Brissett to be the starter, but I really think he will be the starter for the start of the year, and then May will take over later in the season. That might disappoint some people, but I think it's for the best for May, who just really needs some time to develop. But I think long-term, as long as he develops, makes the adjustments he needs to, and plays more fundamentally sound, he has all the talent in the world to be a really productive quarterback for a team, as long as they get some really proven quality talent around him and the new regime shows that they are able to run a functional offense. For my 16th through 19th rookies, this is where we find the first change that I actually did. It's not a major change, but I did bump Ricky Pearsall up from 19 to 16. For him, I was a little bit lower just because of the whole situation with Brandon Ayuk, Deebo Samuel, George Kittle, and Chris McCaffrey all being on the same team. And like I said, at the time of the recording of this, there's some rumors going around with Ayuk being traded. I just don't see that happening, which I'm sure as I'm saying that, someone's pulling up the comments and that he's been traded already. But I just think Ayuk is just such a great talent, and you don't see these young receivers get traded before their first extension very regularly. The only one I can really think of recently was A.J. Brown, and we've seen how that kind of went for the Tennessee Titans. But so Ricky Pearsall did go up, though, because at least when I was looking back at the 49ers salary cap situation, I didn't realize how much trouble they're in. Now, like I said, I don't expect that to impact Brandon Ayuk, but where I do see it impacting is Deebo Samuel. So from what I can understand from their salary cap situation, both should be with the team this coming year, but I think in the 2025 season, we could see Deebo Samuel potentially be cut, or they're going to have to do some sort of massive restructure. So the possibility of Samuel leaving definitely opens the door for Ricky Pearsall to be a little bit higher in my rankings, but he's not as high as some of the other receivers we talked about or any of the players in general that we talked about, just because, like I said, I still expect Ayuk to be there. I still expect Ayuk to be the top target getter as a pass catcher, and he still has George Kittle and Christian McCaffrey to compete with, and in an offense that overall doesn't have a ton of volume. So he would just need to be incredibly efficient with his touches to me, be able to justify him being higher in this list. As for Adonai Mitchell at 17, Roman Wilson at 18, and Jermaine Burton at 19, it really just comes down to them having overall better talent on their teams. I'm a big Michael Pittman Jr. fan, so that's why I think he's still going to be the top target getter in Indianapolis. Plus, you still have Josh Downs, who's no slouch, and we just don't know what type of volume Anthony Richardson is able to provide as a passer. Roman Wilson, I think, is lesser of a player than George Pickens. Pickens I was extremely high on when he was coming out of the draft. I think he's proven to be a really good player despite what people talk about his separation issues. He's still a really solid talent, and I don't know if Roman Wilson's going to be capable of passing him, and kind of similar to some of the other players we talked about, quarterback situation is a little questionable. And for Jermaine Burton, he definitely is not better than Jamar Chase, and T. Higgins for now is still there. I think we don't really know what to expect with the T. Higgins situation. I think he will eventually be moved, so that's why I still am comfortable with him being at 19. But he definitely won't be passing Chase, and I just wasn't a big believer in Burton as a talent compared to the other three names that we talked about just now. So that's why he ended up at 19 for me. My 20 to 24 rookies are all the same as my previous rankings. Javon Baker is still my number 20 rookie. Xavier Legette is 21. Jalen Wright is 22. Kamani Vidal is 23. And Marshawn Lloyd is 24. For Baker, I have him at 20, and I'm willing to take a chance on him there for similar reasons as Jalen Polk. Also, I'm a believer in Javon Baker's talent, so worth the stab this early in the draft. Xavier Legette, I'm not as big of a believer in his talent, but the draft capital is there. But like I said, just with my concerns about him not being as talented as I think his draft capital suggests, and also there's a lot of competition for targets, makes me a little bit wary on trusting him too high. I still have Jalen Wright at 22. I think it's a really good fit for him in Miami. Obviously, Devon Achane is still there and going to be there for quite some time, and Mostert is still there. But I think Jalen Wright could definitely step into Mostert's role after this following season. I still have Kamani Vidal at number 23, which might be one of the more controversial picks, kind of similar to my Troy Franklin pick, but I really like his fit in the gap scheme that Jim Harbaugh and Greg Roman run. And even though I'm not a huge believer in the talent, the opportunity is there, and I'm willing to at least take a stab on him at this point in the draft, especially if you can possibly flip him for something in the future. I was lower on Marshawn Lloyd than a lot of people in the pre-draft process, and it really hurts me as a Packers fan because I want to be a big believer in all the rookies we drafted, but I just have a lot of concerns about his vision, injury history, and fumble issues that he's shown throughout college. Now, he could turn all that around the NFL, but that's just a lot of improvements to make in a short amount of time. And I know a lot of people look at Josh Jacobs' contract and say, it's really just a one-year contract, and in theory it is, but I just have a hard time seeing the team being ready to go from Josh Jacobs, who I think is a more talented player, to Marshawn Lloyd in the following year. I feel more than likely they're going to find a way to keep Jacobs for at least another year. So I don't think it's as simple as Lloyd leading the way for the team. And I think more than likely Jacobs is going to get the bulk of the carries. Now, I think Lloyd will definitely be worked in. The Packers tend to use more of a committee approach for their backs, but I think Jacobs is just the most talented running back on the team right now and for the foreseeable future at this time. All right, here's where we start to get some big changes. At number 25, I have Luke McCaffrey. Number 26, Malachi Corley. 27, I now have Jalen McMillan. 28, Bucky Irving. 29, Ben Sennett. Number 30, Blake Corum. Number 31, I now have Audric Estime. And number 32, I now have Jatavian Sanders. I don't have much to add about Luke McCaffrey or Malachi Corley that I haven't already talked about before, but Jalen McMillan jumped from 39 to 27 in my rookie rankings. Now, a lot of the camp hype that I've been seeing definitely plays a part in that, but I was a pretty big believer in his talent. The reason why I had him as low as 39, though, was just because I just don't think Baker Mayfield is capable of producing that many receivers for that team. I think he's been able to support Mike Evans, but Chris Godwin, since he's been there, has been hit or miss in terms of being a productive fantasy receiver. And I just have a hard time seeing that Jalen McMillan is also going to be capable and really justified being too much higher in the rankings. I think 27 is about as high as I would go for him because I think we're looking at maybe at best a flex option, assuming that Mike Evans and Chris Godwin are still there for the next few years. I know there's been some people that think that Godwin's going to be moved on to another team, but I'm a big believer in Chris Godwin's talent, so I think they're going to find a way to keep him. And until Evans starts to show that the wheels are coming off, I think he's going to be there for the long term. I also don't have much to add about Bucky Irving, Ben Sennett, or Blake Corum that I haven't already talked about before. Just to summarize Blake Corum, since I think he's a little bit more controversial since a lot of people have him a little bit higher, I just have a lot of concerns of how him and Kyren Williams are going to work together. I am personally a pretty big believer in Kyren Williams as a talent. He was my RB3 in the draft when he was coming out, and I feel he's just shown a lot as a pass catcher and pass blocker that Blake Corum hasn't. So I just think there's a lot of concern that Corum may only be used from a fantasy upside standpoint around goal line opportunities, which can be very favorable for him. But even if they're switching drives, I think when they get down to passing opportunities, I think they're going to start to go more towards Kyren Williams just with the upside he provides and the safety he provides as a blocker. Audric Estime also made a pretty big leap in my rankings, going from 45 to 31. I am a pretty big believer in Audric Estime as a talent. I think a lot of the 40 time stuff got overblown for his case, especially considering his size and if you just watched his film. And at least for me, he was my RB3 before the draft, and I think he's showing that in training camp why he was that high in a lot of people's rankings. For him, I still have him a little bit lower just because Javonte Williams is still there, and I think Estime, best case scenario for this year, will be taking Samaje Perine's role, and we'll just kind of see what it turns into after that. What originally caused him to be much lower in my rankings is just a lot of my belief in Blake Watson, who's also there. And Watson's been hurt for a lot of the training camp, and at the time recording, he just recently came back to practice. So we'll kind of see how Watson plays into everything. But Estime has been having a great camp, has been getting a lot of praise, and is just a really talented player from my point of view. So I think he's just someone that is willing to take a chance for this late, even if at worst he might be competing with Javonte Williams for opportunities this year. Jatavian Sanders has also seen a rise in my rankings, going from 40th to 32 now. And at least for his case, it's kind of similar to Audric Estime, where he was viewed as, for a lot of people, number 2 tight end, number 3 tight end before the draft. And then the combine hit, and he just had a really poor performance, dropping him in a lot of people's rankings. For me, he ended up finishing as my tight end 4 before the draft and in the pre-draft process. And I still have a lot of faith in his talent. I still think he is a very good tight end option. I think he'll be a very capable tight end for a team. And I think at least with his situation where he's been able to take advantage of a lot of the Carolina tight ends missing time due to injury, he's been able to build a lot of respect from the coaching staff and hopefully should get an opportunity to potentially even win the tight end 1 role for week 1. For my 33 through 40, not a lot of changes. I still have Rasheen Ali at number 33, Dylan Laube at number 34, Bo Nix at 35, J.J. McCarthy at 36, Malik Washington at 37, Devontae Walker at 38, Mason Tipton now made an appearance at 39, and Bub Means at 40. I like Rasheen Ali before the draft process, and I think he has a dark horse chance to be able to have a bigger role in the following year if Derrick Henry was to move on to another team or just to retire altogether. For Dylan Laube, I'm not as big of a fan of his talent, but the opportunity is there with really only Zamir White as biggest competition for him, so I think he could have a chance to at least earn the pass catching role. I'm a big fan of Bo Nix, and I think JJ McCarthy has some potential just for this being the nature of one quarterback leagues, just to have them a little bit lower since I think they just don't have quite the upside as some of the other quarterbacks that we've talked about already. Malik Washington went later in the draft than what a lot of people expected, and even though I wasn't the biggest fan of his talent, I still think he went later than I really thought he was going to go. But he ended up going to a pretty good situation with the Miami Dolphins where he may not have a big role this season, but if Odell Beckham were to miss any time, he could get some opportunities as a receiver 3 for the offense. Devontae Walker also goes to a situation with the Baltimore Ravens where he could push for the X receiver role over Nelson Aguilar if he is able to show some of that vertical ability he had at UNC. I ended up adding Mason Tipton to my rankings and putting him at 39, actually one spot ahead of Bub Means, who's also on the Saints, just due to all the training camp hype that he's been receiving so far and what Means missing so much time due to different injuries. At least your best ability is availability at times, and Tipton's not only been available, but also been really killing it in camp. And I saw that he even had a media opportunity at the podium, which isn't very often that undrafted free agent rookies get the opportunity to do that. So I think the team is really a believer in his talent. Now, the big thing is, from all the beat writers I've been following, it seems like they're suggesting more that Tipton is fighting for a roster spot or should be able to clinch a roster spot if he has a good preseason, not clinch playing time like I think some of his biggest believers are suggesting. So I wouldn't go taking Tipton expecting him to be the receiver 2, receiver 3 for the team, but someone who could have some upside down the road and maybe get some more playing time opportunity if A.T. Perry doesn't take a step forward. And with the way that most rookie drafts go, I wanted to just keep it to 40 names for this list, but I do have a few names I wanted to bring up since there's probably some players that some people will have questions about where I landed on them. So at 45, I still have Michael Penix Jr. For Penix, I just still have a lot of questions on the upside of holding a quarterback for so many years in a one quarterback league. Often those leagues have a saturation of quarterbacks, so you can sometimes just find a quarterback on waivers or just easily obtain them through a trade. So I just think there's a lot better options to be able to target a lottery pick this late in the draft than to take a quarterback that you're just going to be sitting on and hoping he pans out. Now, if it's a super flex league, that definitely changes, and I have some more thoughts on that in an article that I wrote earlier in the off season, which I can link if anyone's interested in that. I kind of compared how Jordan Love's value fluctuated, and ultimately I suggested that Michael Penix Jr. in a super flex probably makes sense to target around a mid-second just based on how Jordan Love was valued. But again, totally up to anyone if they're more of a believer in his talent. I can see going higher, but that's just where I would stand. Ray Davis also went from 54 to 46 in my rankings. There wasn't really much from training camp that caused that rise in rankings, as he actually has had some fumble issues from what I've seen in camp that he'll need to clean up for the preseason. The rise was more so just me being a little bit more optimistic about his opportunities, but I'm still pretty pessimistic as it's pretty clear from these rankings. He's just basically the same age as James Cook, likely doesn't provide much more in the receiving game, and he could get some goal line opportunities, but when you have Josh Allen on the team, I think he's just going to take all those goal line touchdowns anyways. So I just think the upside is really limited for Davis, and I think a lot of people are overvaluing what a committee back is capable of with the Buffalo offense, but again, that's just my opinion on the situation. Johnny Wilson also saw a rise from 57 to 49 for me. I was actually a really big Johnny Wilson fan in the summer scouting from last year and also in the pre-draft process. He actually graded out as my receiver 12 for the entire class. So I'm really happy to see him make a little more justification for his ranking being that high for me. Well, the reason why I still have him at 49, though, is he still has A.J. Brown, of course, on the team. He still has Devontae Smith. Dallas Goedert is still there. The team just added Saquon Barkley. And you have Jalen Hurts that will be throwing the ball, but also running a fair amount. So I just think the receiver 3 role, even if Johnny Wilson were to win that role, is just not the most productive role for fantasy purposes. So I just don't know if he's really going to be able to do that much, but really like him as a player and talent. I think he could win that spot, if nothing else, with his big frame, blocking, and just overall catch radius. All right, and that does it for the rankings. Like I mentioned earlier, if you want to find my full evals and more explanation on my rankings for the players, you can find those links in the description to be able to get more information there. And next week, I'll be making more of a shift back to college, where we'll be discussing college players with the most approved this coming season based on my summer scouting. If you want to make sure you don't miss that or any future content after, be sure to subscribe. And while you're at it, like the video as I'm still working to try to have a good start to the channel. Thank you all and see you all next time.